In this final tutorial, I'm going to be going through my environment speed paint and putting the text into the biographies. I think I mentioned in a previous tutorial that I wasn't quite sure what I wanted, how I wanted my speed paint to turn out. So I kind of just started making areas of colour to where I thought I might put things like the mountains, and I knew I wanted a waterfall in there, and I knew I wanted like a field of trees. So I just put the blocks of colour in where I thought they might look best, and I went from there. It took me a little while to find a brush that I was happy with. In the end, the one that I've used to make the big blocks of colour was a brush that I downloaded. It kind of makes the page look like it's on a canvas, which I thought worked quite well for my image. So I've blocked out the mountains, and you can see where I've started to put my forest, and there's a rock in the foreground there. It took me quite a while to get the waterfall and the little river there the way I wanted it to. So I'm now just starting to not do the proper detail, but just put in some darker and lighter colours of where, just to give it a kind of outline so I can, something for me to work with. I wanted the mountains to look like they were all behind each other, so I've made the front one there a bit more detailed and darker than the other ones. I trialled a few brushes for the trees that I didn't like before I found the one that I wanted. And then it was just a matter of sort of thinking about where the light source, the sun, was coming from. The sun, in my mind, is on the same place where the viewer is, so you can't see the sun in the picture. So the light's sort of coming from the side there, shining on top of the trees. I used a tiny leaf brush to do all of the trees, and I think it worked out really well. And then to do the ones at the back, I just made the opacity a bit lighter, a greater opacity rather, for the back trees. A lot of the image was playing around with different opacities, trying to make sure that things in the background looked like they were in the background. I did sort of struggle with that a little bit. Working on different layers does help. Some people don't tend to work on different layers when they're doing a speed paint, but I find it beneficial. Then if I mess something up, I can just delete the layer and try again. So I use different layers for the mountains, for the forests, and for the rock in the foreground. And the waterfall, I think originally the waterfall was part of the forest layer, but then I did separate them afterwards because it was getting difficult to separate the foreground from the midground there. So it kind of looks like the river is part of the forest. I do put a rock in there to sort of separate that further, which did help. Which is what I'm doing now. I'm putting in a second rock on the other side of that river to separate it from the midground. It did help, but there was still not separated enough for my liking, but I left it at that point. I really like how that rock in the foreground turned out. I was pretty impressed. I actually watched a tutorial specifically on making rocks, and I tried to use some of the tips that they talked about in that tutorial, and I think it really worked out well. I was pretty happy with how it was turning out at this point, and I did have a break coming up right now. So I have to apologise. For some reason, my final video finishing off my environment speed art didn't work. It got corrupted, so I'm going to have to apologise, but in the next little segment I will explain exactly what I did and you'll see the final image. Here's my final environment speed art with the finished areas. You can see I've filled in the mountains there. I did them in using the same technique that I did the rocks, so I don't actually think they worked out as well as they could have, because they do look just more like large rocks rather than mountains. So that's something I think I need to work on there. I increased the opacity to try and make them look more in the background, which, yeah, I'm sure there's other techniques that I can use to make that turn out a bit better, but it worked for this image. I finished off the forest, making it a little bit more detailed. I think I went a little bit too far, to be honest. I think it was fine the way it was. I think I got a little bit excited with the leaf brush tool that I was using, and I think the less is more approach would have been better, and I should have stopped a bit earlier. But yeah, I think it does look fine, but I did a little bit too much with that in the end. You can see I've added in a little bit of embellishment with some sun glare, and also I added some tiny, you can't really see well from here, but there's tiny little pink flowers added onto the trees, and then you've got a close-up of some of those petals in the wind. Here I've added the page composition that I finished earlier over the top of the environment speed paint. That was a little bit like the moment of truth, putting them together and seeing what they look like. I have put them on obviously 2 separate layers and decreased or increased the opacity, whichever one means making it lighter, so that it's not taking away from the main characters, because as I did mention at the beginning that I wanted those to be my focus. I was really happy with the way the colours worked together. It worked really well. So now I'm actually filling in the biographies, trying to pick a font that I liked. I used a more elegant font for the name titles, and then a more easily readable font for the biographies, for the written descriptor parts. And yeah, this was the last step, and I was feeling very relieved at this point that everything had turned out, and I was happy with the way it worked out. That I'd worked through areas that I found challenging and really in the beginning wasn't sure if I would be able to do them. That speed paint was one of them. For a very first attempt at a speed paint, particularly an environment speed paint, 2 areas that I have little to no experience with, I was quite happy with how it turned out. I certainly didn't expect it to be on the level of people who've been doing it for a very long time, but for a first effort, I think I'm pretty proud of that. And I sort of took that first step, and now I feel more confident to be able to tackle more in the future. And it really is just a matter of watching tutorials and seeing how people do things, and then adapting those strategies for your own purposes and in the way that you want to use them. So coming up, final image, assignment finished, project finished, lots of relief, and thanks for watching.